Okay, picking up where we left off. June 22nd. I woke up early. The camp was still asleep. Stars shone, but the sky was just beginning to lighten. I saw something white hanging from Charlie's wagon. I crept over to see. My heart caught in my throat. It was Rachel. She was hanging upside down. Her nightdress was caught in the axle of the wagon. She was just hanging there. "Rachel?" I said. I tried to lift her up. I couldn't. She was stuck. She didn't answer, but her eyes were wide open. "Rachel!" I said loud. Aunt Lizzie stuck her head out of the wagon. She screamed. Uncle Arthur and Pa scrambled from beneath the wagons. Pa pulled his knife from his belt. He cut Rachel's gown loose, but it was too late. Rachel was dead. Everyone is crying. My throat is so tight, I think I will choke. Later, Rachel got hung by the sash of her nightdress. We wonder where she was going in the night. Aunt Lizzie cries and cries. Ma acts like she's been struck dumb. Charlie doesn't speak. Pa and Uncle Arthur look stunned. Grandpa and I went off to the creek. Grandpa put tobacco in his pipe. We sat side by side. I wanted him to say something to make it better, but he didn't say anything at all. Later still, Cousin Daniel shouts at us to move out, but Aunt Lizzie won't move until there's a decent grave for Rachel. The men dug a deep hole. Aunt Lizzie shook her head. She said it wasn't deep enough. The wolves would dig it up. She climbed in the grave herself and began to dig. Uncle Arthur took the shovel from her. He said he'd see the grave went 6 feet down. He promised. June 23rd. We just go on. Charlie doesn't speak much. Ma and Pa are silent too. They hug Becky to them. I know they're thinking of Rachel. My heart hurts. Night. Tonight Aunt Lizzie brought Rachel's things to Ma. There was a bonnet, a little dress, some underthings. She said she wouldn't be needing them now. Maybe Becky could use them. She stood there before Ma, the baby clothes in her hand. Ma just looked at her, and then she reached for Aunt Lizzie. They hugged, and then the two of them cried and cried. I hope Ma never puts those clothes on Becky. June 24th. Something strange. Today Charlie and Bobby and I went to collect buffalo chips. Some are nasty and wet and slimy, but the dry ones are good for the fires. Bobby is the only girl who will help collect them. Charlie picked up a buffalo chip. Suddenly he threw it at me. He picked up another. He threw that. At first I was surprised. Then it was a game. I threw one, he threw one. I threw one. Bobby began to throw them. But then I saw Charlie was crying. Tears just ran down his face. Had I hit him? Did I hurt you? I asked. He shook his head and kept right on crying. I thought I knew why he cried. Then I'm kind of ashamed of this. I looked to see if Bobby was watching. She wasn't. She was staring at the ground, so I put my arm around Charlie's shoulder. He seems a bit more cheerful tonight. June 25th. Buffalo. They're way out across the prairie. They're no more than small black dots. When we camped tonight, men went from wagon to wagon taking votes. Should we stop to hunt? Mrs. Meany looked up from her knitting. No, she shouted, but women have no say in these matters. Cousin Daniel said the men have buffalo fever, but though he doesn't want to waste a day, he agreed. For all the men voted yes. Everybody wants fresh meat after the dried meat we've been eating. So early tomorrow morning the men will hunt. Pa won't go. Some men have to stay to guard the wagons. I begged Grandpa to let me join the hunt. He squinted up his eyes at me. He said, "We'll see." That usually means no. June 26th. I'm so tired I can hardly hold this pencil, but I must write this. Today I went on the buffalo hunt. I rode with Grandpa ahead of him on his saddle. The sun wasn't up yet. There were many men in our party. Soon, though, Grandpa and I were far ahead. There on the plains ahead were buffalo, hundreds of them. They were so big. Their heads are as big around as wagon hoops, it seemed. They looked at us, not afraid at all. When we got close, we stopped. Softly, Grandpa and I slid down and hobbled Daisy. Grandpa took the cover off his rifle. He squinted through it. I could see him aim for a huge bull that looked our way. Grandpa turned. He handed me the gun. He said, "Your shot, son. Line it up in your sights, right through the lungs." I could hardly believe it. Me? Me? He nodded. I felt my heart thundering. I looked through the sights. I let off a shot and then another. I, Joshua Martin McCullough, have killed a buffalo. Later, the rest of the day was hard. We skinned the buffalo and cut it into steaks. There was blood and guts everywhere. It almost made me dizzy. Cousin Daniel cut some of the meat into thin sheets for drying. The meat will be a good change to our dull diet. Some nights I dream of food. I especially dream of eggs. June 27th. Except for yesterday and the hunting, I hardly see Grandpa anymore. He spends all his time riding beside Miss Emmeline and Elizabeth. Ma sniffed when he told her. She said that Grandpa had so little sense he might end up married to again. Imagine, the sisters are younger than Ma even. June 28th. Cousin Daniel called it a hill. It was more like a mountain. We had to unload our wagons and haul things up by ropes and chains. Even our wagons needed to be hauled by chains. Things slid out and people slid down. Two tiny hole girls tried to jump over the front of their wagon. Their skirts got caught up in the yokes. They almost got run over. Grandpa grabbed one. Cousin Daniel got the other. And do you know, both little girls laughed. Grandpa paddled the bottom of the girl he held, and she howled. But I'm happy. We don't have to bury two more children tonight. Nighttime. Something bad. Bobby followed me when I went to hobble the horses. She was chattering in that way that she has, talking about two little hole girls almost falling under the wagon wheels. I wasn't saying much. Suddenly she said, "How come you won't talk to me any more?" I said, "I talk to you," but I didn't look at her. She said, "Not like you used to." I shrugged. She made this little huffy noise through her nose. "You're scared of what those dumb boys say." "They're not dumb," I said. "They make kissy sounds," she said. "So?" I said. "So you're scared of them," she said. "Am not," I said. "You're a chicken," she said. "That's what." Then she made this "bark, bark" sound at me. She ran away, her skirts twisting around her ankles, but I thought she was crying. Tonight, I feel like such a chicken. Later, after supper, I asked Ma if I could take Becky to the Druckers' wagon. I said maybe they'd like to play with Bobby's sister Sarah, or she'd like to play with Bobby's sister Sarah. I know she must miss Rachel. I also thought I could talk to Bobby. Ma shook her head no. She hasn't let Becky out of her sight since Rachel's accident. In camp, I see Mrs. Hole and Mrs. Gibbons and Aunt Lizzie. 3 mamas, 3 dead babies. It must be hard to be a mama. June 30th. Tomorrow we have found a ford. Tomorrow we have to ford a river that's running high. We'll turn the oxen free and float the wagons across. Tonight we spent hours adding more caulk to the wagon wheels so it will float. Pa says this time my job will be to stay in the wagon with Ma and Becky. I'll try to shift our belongings if the wagon tilts. Yeah, I won't have to get in the water. July 1st. I'm so tired when we stop each day. We're all so tired. Even the oxen are exhausted and weak from the loads. Today, Cousin Daniel rode back along the trail. He said each wagon has to leave some heavy things behind. Uncle Arthur put his bureau and Aunt Lizzie's rocking chair out along the trail. Mama left her wedding trunk and framed pictures. Mrs. Gibbons left a baby cradle. I saw it rocking in the wind, all empty and sad. Mrs. Meany said she wouldn't leave a single thing. I'm already as poor as a snake, she cried. Cousin Daniel started to say something. Then he seemed to change his mind. I wish we'd left Mrs. Meany behind. She is a snake. July 2nd. Aunt Lizzie is ill. For weeks now she vomits in the mornings. She spends much of her day lying inside the wagon. I wonder if Rachel's death has made her ill. I worry that she'll die. Then what will Charlie do? Afternoon. We were making camp. Out across the prairie we saw figures coming fast, Indians on horseback. Suddenly Cousin Daniel dug in his pack. He came out with the most amazing thing, a military jacket. He put it on, then he picked up his rifle. Everyone got still and quiet. The Indians came thundering up to us. There must have been 100 of them. They were big and dark, and some had painted faces. Their heads were shaved, but for tufts of hair on top. Their horses snorted and stamped. Cousin Daniel said how do, and the Indians said how do. One brave stared at Grandpa for a long time. Then he offered his daughter in trade for Daisy. Grandpa said no. Cousin Daniel gave them some tobacco and beads. They gave Cousin Daniel a buffalo skin. Then they rode off. Cousin Daniel says they may come back later for Grandpa's horse. We'll set extra guards to watch tonight. Night. I found out why Cousin Daniel put on his military jacket. Indians, he said, respect the military. They've been warned not to attack. If they do, their nation will be wiped out. I thought that was a very terrible thing to say to any man. July 3rd. More Indians today. Our wagon was in the front of the line. That's because we changed places so that not everyone gets all the dust from the front wagons. We came over the rise, and there was an entire village. There were men and women and children and dogs. I held Buster close. The Indians didn't seem interested in us, but I kept looking at them. I thought about what Cousin Daniel said yesterday about wiping out the Indian nation. It must be hard to be an Indian. July 4th. For some reason, everyone seems happy tonight. After supper, music and dancing began. This time, some men joined in with the women, and then Charlie poked me. I stared. Grandpa, my grandpa, he was dancing with one of the sisters. It was Miss Emmeline. Later, I heard Ma tell Pa that Grandpa was making a fool of himself. Pa just smiled, and I turned away from Ma because I was smiling too. And that's where we're going to stop for now.